The knock on my office door came at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon on a muggy Tuesday. It was light, hesitant, and uneven. It was the distinct sound made by a junior staff member who had just drawn the short straw in an executive meeting and had to deliver catastrophic news to someone twice his age. I did not look up immediately for my quarterly logistics distribution reports. Instead, I continued scanning the supply route metrics across our Midwest distribution hubs, double-checking the operational overhead that young management had been attempting to shave down for the past 2 quarters. "Come in," I called out calmly. Keeping my red pen hovered over a suspicious line item in the transport budget, the heavy mahogany door opened and clicked shut. Heavy silence settled into the room, broken only by the low hum of my encrypted workstation. I looked up to find Justin Bradley standing inside my doorway. Justin was 26 years old, a fresh legal hire straight out of Georgetown Law, probably still carrying over $200,000 in student loan debt. The young man was clutching a sleek black digital tablet against his chest with both hands, holding it like an unexploded ordnance device. "Mr. Vance," Justin said, his voice barely rising above a strained whisper. His eyes darted nervously around my bookshelf, avoiding direct eye contact. "You have been terminated, sir. I am Gordon Vance. I am 54 years old, and I have served as the Director of Operations and Strategic Logistics at Pinnacle Defense Systems for 24 years. I built this company's supply chain infrastructure from the ground up, starting back in 1999 when our current Chief Executive Officer, Victoria Montgomery, was still in middle school worrying about homeroom seating charts. Pinnacle is a mid-sized defense contractor doing $2.8 billion in annual revenue with 12,000 employees nationwide, relying on critical Pentagon logistics contracts that keep our distribution channels active day and night." I leaned back in my executive leather chair and looked at Justin for a quiet moment. "Terminated?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. "Justin, I have a mandatory Department of Defense contract review meeting scheduled in less than 90 minutes. Nice attempt at humor, though. Who sent you down here to play this game?" The young associate did not laugh. He did not even blink. Instead, his throat worked hard, as if trying to swallow a marble. He slowly turned the tablet around and tapped the glass screen. Displayed on the monitor was a formal electronic document titled Executive Separation and Buyout Agreement. At the bottom of the document sat my full name, Gordon Vance, accompanied by a timestamp showing 11:30 that morning, complete with a digital signature verification code. I leaned forward and studied the clock mounted on my office wall, 2:47 in the afternoon. "Fascinating timing," I remarked softly, keeping my tone completely even. "Where exactly did this document originate?" "Human Resources routed it through the Executive Transition Protocol," Justin explained, his voice shaking slightly. "Your security clearance access has been flagged for administrative review, Mr. Vance. You are no longer listed as active personnel for classified government logistics projects." That statement caused me to pause. Obtaining my top-secret clearance had taken 18 months of rigorous federal background checks and cost Pinnacle over $75,000 in investigative fees. In defense contracting, an executive clearance is not something a human resources manager simply toggles off on a Tuesday afternoon without a formal board resolution or a military inquiry. The air inside my office grew noticeably dense. Justin shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly anticipating that I would lose my temper, shout, or demand an immediate phone call with executive leadership. But when you have managed forward logistics lines under enemy fire, corporate posturing does not make your heart race. I simply studied the signature on the screen. The handwriting strokes appeared remarkably similar to my own angular signature, the style I had used ever since my military service days. However, the pen pressure points and letter spacing were completely wrong. "That is not my signature, Justin," I stated quietly. Justin squinted at the tablet screen. "The authentication hash matches the electronic exemplars stored in your primary personnel file, sir, and legal instructed me." He trailed off, hesitating. "Let me guess," I interrupted smoothly. "Victoria Montgomery and the outside legal consultants she hired last month?" Justin gave a brief, subtle nod. I allowed a faint smile to cross my face. It was not a smile born of amusement. It was the cold, focused smile a military strategist gets when he realizes the opposing force has committed a critical tactical error by advancing into open terrain without checking their flanks. "Tell you what, Justin," I said, standing up and unbuttoning my suit jacket to reach for my leather briefcase. "Walk with me." "Walk where, sir?" Justin asked, taking a step backward toward the hallway. "To the main executive boardroom on the fourth floor," I replied. "Sir, your security badge has been deactivated," Justin warned, checking his tablet interface. "The building access protocol has already locked your executive privileges." "Son," I said, looking him dead in the eye as I tightened my tie, "if you truly believe that a forged electronic document and an automated human resources checklist are sufficient to keep me out of a boardroom whose physical security parameters I personally designed, then you have a great deal to learn about how this company actually functions." I picked up the worn brown leather briefcase that my wife Evelyn had given me when I was promoted to operations director 15 years ago. Justin fell into step behind me, still gripping his digital tablet as if it were a shield. As we walked down the wide carpeted corridor past the central logistics operations floor, I looked through the glass partitions at the dozens of monitoring stations I had established over 2 decades ago. When I first stepped into Pinnacle in 1999, the company was a struggling regional transport firm trying to handle basic vehicle maintenance contracts. Today, we coordinated complex distribution lines for multiple military divisions across 8 states. All of that operational capability had been engineered by a man who gained his foundational logistics experience, moving heavy artillery ammunition and emergency medical supplies with the 101st Airborne Division during Desert Storm back in 1991. When you have successfully maintained supply lines under extreme battlefield pressure, corporate maneuvers inside air-conditioned office towers feel remarkably transparent. Underneath my calm demeanor, a familiar sense of tactical focus was awakening. It was not anger or resentment, it was tactical recognition. I had seen this type of ambush before, and I knew precisely how to execute a counteroffensive. When Justin and I reached the central elevator bank, the young associate swiped his digital keycard against the reader. A sharp red light flashed, accompanied by a high-pitched rejection tone. "They have restricted your level access across the entire facility," Justin muttered, looking genuinely flustered. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. It was the manual physical override key for the stairwell access door, a mechanical backup security feature I had insisted on installing during the building renovation back in 2015. When you have served in operational zones where power grids fail and digital locks become useless pieces of static metal, you learn never to rely entirely on electronic infrastructure. I inserted the key, turned the cylinder, and pushed the heavy door open. We climbed 4 flights of concrete stairs in steady silence. I did not rush my pace or break my breathing rhythm, counting each step with military precision just as I used to do during airborne training jumps decades ago. When we reached the 4th floor landing, I paused near the heavy reinforced door leading to the executive suite. Through the frosted glass panel, I could hear the distinct sound of laughter and polite conversation emanating from the corner boardroom. Victoria Montgomery's sharp California accent was cutting through the deeper voices of our senior board members. Justin swallowed hard, his throat moving nervously. "Mr. Vance, if that electronic signature really is valid in the system..." I turned and looked at the young man. He reminded me of myself 30 years ago, eager to do a proper job, caught in the middle of a conflict he did not fully understand. "We are about to discover who actually holds authority in this building, Justin," I said quietly. I turned the stainless steel handle and pushed the boardroom door wide open. The lively conversation inside the room died instantly, as if someone had severed the main power line. 7 board members were seated around a custom 20-foot mahogany conference table that cost more than most working families earn in 5 years. Mounted on the far wall was an 85-inch high-definition monitor, displaying the opening slide of my scheduled presentation. Q3 Logistics, Optimization and Supply Chain Restructuring, presented by Gordon Vance, Director of Operations. The leather armchair at the head of the table, positioned to command full visual control of the room, sat vacant. Victoria Montgomery froze with a porcelain coffee cup halfway to her lips. At 34 years old, Victoria was the embodiment of modern corporate arrogance. Armed with a Stanford Master of Business Administration degree and backed by her wealthy venture capitalist father, she believed that effective corporate leadership meant terminating experienced personnel over 45 and replacing operational knowledge with high-priced cloud algorithms. Her dark hair was styled in a rigid, immaculate bun, and her expensive tailored suit was designed to convey absolute authority. I stepped into the room with measured, deliberate strides. Justin hovered near the doorway behind me, looking as though he had walked into a firing squad zone. Nobody spoke for 5 long seconds. The silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, Justin cleared his throat and spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Gordon Vance has been officially removed from active roster status as of 11:30 this morning. Per Section 4B of the Executive Severance Framework, his security clearance is under review. Digital signature authentication has been confirmed." I stepped forward to the edge of the mahogany table, looking down at the tablet screen Justin had held out. My name was clearly visible, rendered in an electronic script that mimicked my handwriting style down to the slight rightward slant caused by a broken wrist I suffered during a parachute drop in 1992. Whoever had engineered this forgery had spent considerable effort attempting to make it appear authentic. Across the table sat Eleanor Rhodes, our head of corporate compliance. Eleanor was usually as steady and unreadable as a seasoned diplomat, but right now she was staring intensely at the polished wooden surface, refusing to meet my gaze. I turned my eyes directly onto Victoria. She did not flinch, but her grip on her coffee cup tightened until her knuckles turned pale. "Victoria," I said, my voice as steady as a rifle sight, "there appears to be a severe misunderstanding regarding corporate protocol." Victoria let out a short, patronizing laugh, trying to project total control. "Gordon, let us handle this privately in human resources. This is simply an automated administrative transition. You know how digital system updates can occasionally create confusion." I raised my hand slightly, a sharp, deliberate gesture that commanded immediate silence. "I intend to deliver my scheduled operational review," I stated calmly. Justin blinked in disbelief. "Sir, you are not authorized to present classified logistics data while under security review." "Then, we shall restrict this discussion to unclassified corporate governance and fiduciary compliance," I replied smoothly. 4 weeks prior to this moment, I had identified the initial intelligence indicators that an internal coup was being prepared against me. It began with a subtle anomaly, an invitation to an executive budget planning session that was routed to every senior manager except me. I only discovered the meeting because Gavin Ross, our dedicated finance director, stopped by my office to ask why my division's numbers were listed under a new department heading. "Are you presenting your operational budget on Thursday, Gordon, or is Victoria handling the logistics defense allocation herself?" Gavin had asked, looking puzzled over his spreadsheet printouts. I had kept my expression completely neutral. "What logistics allocation, Gavin?" Gavin frowned. "The quarterly restructuring plan. Victoria mentioned during the executive committee call that she was streamlining operations to eliminate legacy management structures." That was intelligence indicator number 1. Deliberate communication isolation. Indicator number 2 arrived 2 weeks later, courtesy of a junior analyst named Jeremy Miller. Jeremy was a hard-working kid with a habit of rushing his email dispatches. He had intended to forward a draft of the new organizational chart to Eleanor Rhodes in compliance. Instead, he mistyped the internal directory address and dispatched the document directly to my inbox. I opened the attachment late on a Sunday evening while reviewing inventory logs at home with Evelyn. Scrolling down the chart, I found that my entire division, operations, and strategic logistics had been completely erased. In its place was a new entity called Integrated Efficiency Management, headed by Victoria's newest favorite consultant, Brandon Miller. Brandon's primary qualification was a glossy white paper on blockchain logistics that used the word synergistic 14 times in 20 pages. He had never managed a single transport truck or physical warehouse in his life. Rather than reacting emotionally, I made a fresh pot of coffee, sat at my desk with a clean legal notepad, and began drafting an operational battle plan. I listed our assets, our corporate vulnerabilities, and potential allies within the organization, and at the top of a fresh page I wrote two words: Vanguard Apex. Vanguard Apex Holdings LLC was a corporate entity I had established back in 2008 during the national financial crisis to manage small real estate investments and independent logistics consulting projects. I had kept the company active for 16 years, paying the annual Delaware filing fees and maintaining its corporate registration in total compliance with federal law. While most executives stored their wealth in standard retirement funds, I maintained an independent corporate structure that existed quietly in the public records, completely invisible to Victoria's superficial management sweeps. I called my longtime friend Hank Sullivan, a former logistics sergeant from the 101st Fort Airborne, who now operated a corporate legal services firm in Jacksonville, Florida. Gordon. Hank's loud voice boomed through the receiver. I thought you were comfortably retired by now. Far from it, Hank, I replied. I need Vanguard Apex Holdings fully updated in Delaware, verify franchise tax status, confirm registered agent representation, and ensure all corporate equity holding capabilities are active. Consider it done, Hank replied without hesitation. What kind of situation are you stepping into? A tactical ambush, I answered. I just want to ensure my countermeasures are fully operational. Over the next 2 weeks, while Victoria was posting corporate buzzwords on executive forums, I quietly gathered the documentation that would decide the future of Pinnacle Defense Systems. What Victoria Montgomery and her outside advisors failed to understand was that corporate governance is governed by foundational contracts, not corporate press releases. Back in 2009, when Pinnacle Defense Systems transitioned from a private enterprise to a publicly traded corporation, the company issued multiple classes of equity. Class A common stock was created for public market trading. Class B stock was reserved for employee option pools, and Class D equity, a small specialized block of founder shares, was issued to key operational architects who had secured our initial government transport contracts. Through Vanguard Apex Holdings LLC, I had acquired 500 Class D shares in 2009 as part of an early equity restructuring agreement. These shares were non-voting during standard operations, remaining dormant in corporate registries. However, buried inside Section 12.7 of Pinnacle's original corporate charter was a critical governance clause designed by early founders to prevent hostile takeovers. The clause stated explicitly that in the event an executive holding Class D equity was subjected to involuntary termination or removal without prior formal approval from a majority vote of the board of directors, voting authority for those Class D shares would instantly activate. Furthermore, each individual Class D share carried a voting weight equivalent to 1,000 Class A common shares. Victoria and her legal consultants had executed their termination maneuver using an administrative executive authority clause intended only for routine personnel adjustments. They had completely overlooked Section 12.7 of the foundational charter. It was a classic strategic error, focusing entirely on tactical execution while neglecting foundational legal rules. I spent 3 days performing precise equity calculations. Pinnacle had approximately 2.3 million Class A common shares outstanding. My 500 Class D shares, upon activation, represented 500,000 voting shares, granting Vanguard Apex Holdings exactly 21.7% of the total voting power of the company. That was more than enough voting authority to block major executive actions, call emergency board assemblies, and challenge corporate governance decisions. Because my termination was executed at 11:30 that morning, without a board vote, my Class D voting rights had automatically activated the moment Justin delivered the notice. Simultaneously, I compiled a comprehensive evidence dossier regarding Victoria's recent executive management. Victoria had spent $1.2 million of corporate funds on leadership retreats at luxury 5-star resorts where the primary activity was private golf instruction. More critically, She had approved $890,000 in consulting payments to Apex Strategic Solutions, an entity registered to the residential address of her father's venture capital firm, representing a clear breach of fiduciary duty and an illegal dissipation of corporate assets. Even more serious was a $15 million Defense Logistics Agency contract proposal that Victoria had submitted 3 weeks prior. In that federal filing, she had listed Brandon Miller as Director of Operations and Strategic Logistics, claiming he possessed 15 years of defense logistics experience. Brandon was 28 years old and had been with the company for less than 7 months. Presenting false executive credentials on a federal defense contract constituted material misrepresentation under federal contracting regulations and a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1341, governing mail and wire fraud, as well as the Federal False Claims Act. Furthermore, Victoria's abrupt attempt to purge senior operational managers violated the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, known as the Warren Act under Title 29, United States Code, Section 2101, which mandates a 60-day advance notice for major corporate restructurings. 2 weeks before the boardroom confrontation, Hank Sullivan's finalized all regulatory updates for Vanguard Apex Holdings LLC, submitting amended beneficial ownership filings to federal regulatory databases. The paperwork was processed quietly, legally, and completely under the radar of Victoria's management team. On the Saturday morning preceding my termination, I sat at my kitchen table with Evelyn reviewing the complete dossier. "Gordon," Evelyn said gently, looking across the stack of financial records and legal filings, "you have spent 24 years building this company into a national defense provider. Are you certain you want to expose all of this?" "Evelyn," I replied, holding her hand, "Victoria is destroying the foundation of what we built. If she continues on this path, Pinnacle will lose its defense clearances, 12,000 people will lose their livelihoods, and federal auditors will dismantle the business within a year. Exposing truth is not destroying the company, it is defending it." Evelyn smiled softly, nodding in agreement. She knew better than anyone that when a former paratrooper commits to a course of action, he carries it through to completion. On Monday evening, using my administrative credentials through the executive portal, I logged into the system to verify the document routing trails. I discovered that Victoria's team had predated the digital termination agreement to 11:30 a.m. on Tuesday, intending to present me with a completed file before I could react. I allowed the digital file to process without interference, knowing that the precise timestamp would serve as undeniable proof that the termination occurred prior to any board consultation. By Tuesday afternoon, as I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the fourth-floor boardroom with Justin Bradley following behind me, every element of my operational plan was locked in place. Victoria believed she was clearing out an outdated operations director. In reality, she had triggered a legal mechanism that put her entire corporate career directly onto the chopping block. Standing at the head of the mahogany conference table in the fourth-floor boardroom, I looked slowly around the room. The initial shock of my unannounced entry was beginning to transform into deep tension among the assembled board members. Victoria Montgomery stood up from her chair, her face flushed with sudden anger. "Gordon, this executive session is private. You are trespassing on corporate property. Justin, call building security immediately and have Mr. Vance escorted off the premises." Justin hesitated near the doorway, looking terrified, his hands trembling over his digital tablet. He did not move toward the wall phone. I did not move an inch. Instead, I unlatched my leather briefcase, opened the brass clasps with a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the silent room, and pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Regulatory Compliance and Fiduciary Audit. "Before security is summoned, Victoria," I said, keeping my voice completely level and authoritative, "the board of directors needs to review several critical documents regarding executive governance and federal compliance." Walter Henderson, our longest-serving board member, leaned forward. Walter was 71 years old, a retired industrialist who had served on Pinnacle's board since our initial public offering in 2003. He possessed little patience for corporate drama and valued legal compliance above all else. "What documents are you referring to, Gordon?" Walter asked, his sharp eyes locking onto me. I slid the manila folder across the smooth mahogany table directly toward Walter and Eleanor Rhodes. "Inside that dossier," I explained, "you will find documented evidence of unauthorized corporate expenditure, including $890,000 funneled to an entity controlled by executive relatives, representing a direct breach of fiduciary duty and dissipation of corporate assets. More critically, you will find a copy of the $15 million Defense Logistics Agency contract proposal submitted last week." Eleanor Rhodes immediately opened the folder, her legal background forcing her to scan the primary documents. Her eyes widened as she read the second page. "Gordon, what is the issue with the defense proposal?" "The issue," I stated, "is that the proposal certifies Brandon Miller as Director of Operations with 15 years of defense logistics experience. Brandon is 28 years old and possesses no operational defense credentials. Submitting falsified executive qualifications on a federal defense contract is a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1341, and constitutes federal procurement fraud under the False Claims Act. Such actions place Pinnacle at immediate risk of debarment from all Department of Defense contracting." The room went completely cold. Walter Henderson's face hardened into stone. "Federal procurement fraud?" he repeated, turning his fierce gaze onto Victoria. Victoria's composure shattered. "That proposal was drafted by outside consultants," she protested, her voice rising an octave. "It was an administrative drafting error, and regardless of these false claims, Gordon Vance was officially terminated at 11:30 this morning. He has no standing in this room." "Justin," I said calmly, turning toward the young legal associate, "would you please open the corporate legal database on your tablet and read Section 12.7 of Pinnacle's original corporate charter, aloud for the board?" Justin's fingers flew across his tablet screen. He located the foundational document, scanned the text, and swallowed hard before reading in a clear, unsteady voice. Section 12.7, Shareholder Voting Rights. Upon involuntary executive separation, in the event that any corporate executive holding Class D equity is subjected to involuntary separation or termination without prior formal resolution approved by a majority vote of the Board of Directors, all voting authority assigned to said Class D equity shall immediately activate. Each Class D share shall carry voting power equivalent to 1,000 Class A common shares. The silence that followed was absolute. Walter Henderson turned to Eleanor Rhodes. "Eleanor, how many Class D shares are currently registered in our corporate ledger?" Eleanor scanned her tablet interface rapidly, her face turning pale. 500 shares, Walter. They are registered under Vanguard Apex Holdings LLC. "That represents 500,000 active voting shares," I interjected smoothly. "Exactly 21.7% of the total voting power of Pinnacle Defense Systems. Because my termination was executed at 11:30 this morning. Without board authorization, those voting rights are fully active right now. Furthermore, because the termination agreement relies on a forged digital signature, the severance contract itself is void ab initio under established contract law." Diane Albright, a board member with 20 years of Wall Street investment banking experience, leaned forward, staring at Victoria with cold disgust. "You attempted to bypass board authority to fire our chief operations officer, and in doing so, you handed 21.7% voting control to a corporate entity we do not control?" "It gets worse, Diane," Walter Henderson said grimly, looking up from the fraud documentation. "If the Department of Defense audits this contract submission, our entire $2.8 billion operating revenue is frozen pending federal investigation." Victoria backed away from the table slightly, looking around at the board members she had assumed were under her complete control. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a coordinated attempt to undermine executive authority. We can resolve these administrative details in an executive committee session. Executive authority without proper board governance is legally void." "Victoria," I said, looking her directly in the eyes, "you focus so intently on personal ambition and corporate buzzwords that you forgot the fundamental rule of strategy. Never engage an opponent when he holds the high ground and controls the supply lines. Walter Henderson stood up from his chair, his tall frame commanding immediate authority over the boardroom. I move for an emergency board resolution under Section 9.4 of our corporate bylaws, Walter announced, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Given the severe allegations of federal contract misrepresentation, fiduciary breach, and unauthorized executive action, I move that Victoria Montgomery be suspended from all chief executive duties immediately, pending a full forensic legal audit. I second the motion, Diane Albright stated without a second of hesitation. All those in favor? Walter called out. Every single board member around the table raised their hand. Even Eleanor Rhodes raised her hand, recognizing that failing to act would expose the board to personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty. Victoria stood frozen, watching her corporate authority evaporate in a matter of seconds. The motion passes unanimously, Walter declared formally. Victoria, you are suspended from executive duties effective immediately. Building security will escort you from the premises, and your access to corporate systems is revoked. Victoria opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. She looked at Eleanor, then at Diane, and finally at me. Seeing total determination in every face, she picked up her designer leather bag and walked out of the boardroom in complete silence, her heels clicking rapidly against the hard floor. Justin Bradley quickly stepped aside to let her pass, looking stunned by the speed of the executive collapse. Walter turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Gordon, given your equity position and your 24 years of operational leadership, the board is prepared to offer you the position of interim chief executive officer today. I looked at Walter, then at the rest of the board members who were watching me intently. I appreciate the confidence of this board, Walter, I replied in a measured voice, but I have no desire to sit in the chief executive chair. My strength has always been operational strategy and supply chain logistics, not corporate politics. Then who do you suggest we appoint to stabilize the organization? Diane Albright asked. I have a clear recommendation, I said. Gavin Ross. Gavin has served as our finance director for 12 years. He has quietly managed our financial operations with absolute integrity, fixed administrative errors without taking personal credit, and understands every dollar that moves through our defense contracts. He is the steady leader this company needs right now. Walter nodded slowly, considering my proposal. Gavin Ross is a sound choice. He has the respect of the entire finance and operations staff. I reached into my briefcase one final time and pulled out a sealed white envelope. Inside was a formal, hand-signed resignation letter dated for the close of business today. I handed the envelope to Eleanor Rhodes. This is my official resignation, Eleanor. Signed by my own hand, effective at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I am retiring on my own terms, leaving Pinnacle Defense Systems with its logistics infrastructure intact, its federal contracts protected, and its leadership restored to capable hands. Eleanor accepted the envelope with deep respect. Thank you, Gordon, for everything you have built here. I closed my leather briefcase, fastened the brass latches, and gave a brief, respectful nod to the board members. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I walked out of the executive boardroom and headed down the wide corridor. As I passed through the central logistics floor one last time, I looked at the young operations managers monitoring transport routes across the nation. They were working diligently, unaware that an hour ago, their entire division had been on the verge of destruction. Now, their jobs were secure, the company's defense contracts were protected, and the operational integrity of Pinnacle was preserved. When I reached the ground floor lobby, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. I pulled it out and saw a message from Hank Sullivan in Jacksonville. Outstanding tactical maneuver, Sergeant Vance. The first round of drinks is on me next time you visit Florida. I smiled, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and pushed through the heavy glass exit's doors into the warm afternoon sunshine. Walking across the paved parking lot, I found my sedan parked in its reserved space. Evelyn was sitting in the passenger seat reading a book. When she saw me approaching with my briefcase in hand, she rolled down the window and looked at me with a knowing smile. "How did the meeting go, Gordon?" she asked softly. I placed my briefcase in the back seat, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The operation was a complete success, I told her, turning to look at her. Victoria has been suspended. Gavin Ross is taking over management, and my resignation takes effect at 5 o'clock. We are officially free. Evelyn reached over and squeezed my hand. I never doubted you for a second, my paratrooper. As I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the corporate parking lot, I looked back one last time at the glass towers of Pinnacle Defense Systems, reflecting the late afternoon sun. 24 years of dedicated service had come to an end, not through an arrogant executive ambush, but through a disciplined, perfectly timed strategic victory. In corporate life, as in military logistics, authority is merely a title bestowed by paperwork, but true power belongs to those who understand the terrain, master the rules, and execute their strategy with flawless timing. When youth and arrogance collide with decades of experience and institutional knowledge, experience will win every single time.